Hi everyone, and welcome to the Fake Love and Flying Monkeys podcast. My name's Nova Gibson and I am your host. My area of expertise is in supporting victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse and other toxic relationships. I'm the principal counsellor at Brighter Outlook Narcissistic Abuse Counselling Service, and I'm also the author of Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about everything from the initial pink cloud you find yourself on at the start through to the horrific discard and the powerful trauma bond that keeps you hooked. So take your imaginary seat on the roller coaster that is narcissistic abuse, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Hi everyone, I thought I would just jump on before this episode begins because it was recorded a little while ago, and I thought I had better just put a little trigger warning out there because there are certain aspects of Marie's story which you might find triggering. So please know that. And if you're hearing things that are upsetting and you find you're having a triggered response that's really having a negative impact on you, then turn it off. Everyone's at a different stage of their healing, and not everyone is ready to hear the sometimes very explicit stories of other victims and survivors. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Today I have a very special guest. I'm going to be talking to Marie, who is a victim of narcissistic abuse. I prefer to call her a survivor now, and Marie agreed to talk to me to tell her story so that you guys out there know that you're not alone, and I guess to help spread awareness about narcissistic abuse and coercive control and the insidious dynamics of that and the destructive nature of this abuse that there is really so little awareness about in the mental health professions. So I'd like to welcome Marie. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Marie.
Thank you very much for having me, Nova. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So, Marie, I'm so grateful that you came forward to talk about your story. It's not easy to talk about this because of the lack of understanding that's out there, and it's really hard to articulate this type of abuse, and of course because there's the underlying fears much of the time for victims that it's going to come back and restart, I guess, in that their abuser might hear your story and recognize that. And it's a big decision to come forward for a victim of domestic violence, which is what narcissistic abuse and coercive control are. It's a really big decision to come forward and talk about it. So yes, I'm very grateful that you're here. So Marie, enough from me. Please tell our listeners today your story and how your trauma began, where you're at now with it, and what happened to you.
I think the interesting thing is that, there have been several instances of narcissistic abuse and coercive control in my life, spanning, 4 decades. But I feel like the most interesting thing about it is that I've really only been able to put a specific name to it in the last couple of years. And I think that's just, because the word narcissist, the actual, the words coercive control and coercion and all of those things, I think, are becoming more prevalent. And we're starting to actually be able to put some of the behaviors and the abuse that we have experienced under these categories. I feel like that was so much harder when I was actually going through them.
Yeah.
I recognized, that the behavior was unhealthy. I recognized that the behavior was wrong, that it made me feel bad, that I was so confused all the time, that I was conflicted, that there was a constant push and pull in my relationships, but I could never figure out what the specific dynamic was. And the most frustrating thing for, I would say, people that experience that coercive control and narcissistic abuse is that it's not always physical. Physical abuse may accompany that type of abuse, but when there's no specific bruise to really, identify, when the person is not specifically putting their hands on you, or if they're not doing it in that instance, and what you're experiencing is this like psychological, emotional, turmoil and mistreatment, and it's so insidious. I'm thankful that in the last few years, I've actually been able to put a name to it. And I'm thankful to people like you who are calling attention to it.
Yes. Look, Marie, yes, I remember as a mental health professional, even 10 years ago, I hadn't have heard of this type of abuse. I mean, we've all heard of psychological, emotional abuse, but this is something different because there's not often one big thing that happens. It's the accumulative effect of all these, they're not small, but all of these strategies that your abuser, and that's who this person is. They are your abuser. They intend to inflict pain. And it's the accumulative effect of it's like a slow burn, isn't it? And you don't see your boundaries being worn down and you don't see it happening. So it's so hard to articulate. So yes, I'm incredibly grateful that now we have a name for it and that victims are starting to come forward and talk about it like you. So, Marie, I would love to know your story because so often when victims find themselves in one relationship with a narcissist, they can look back and start connecting the dots. And there's often previous trauma, their previous toxic relationships in their past. So can you tell us, what was your story in growing up? Tell us what life was like for you as a child.
Well, I grew up in, I guess, what could be considered sort of your average house. I had siblings. I grew up with a mother and a father who were married. They are still married. I realized that there were dysfunctional things going on. I think at the young age that I started to see all the turmoil in the house, I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And we're talking about, I started to realize things were off at maybe as young as 5 or 6. What I realized as I was going forward was that, my father was an addict. My father was a compulsive gambler, and it had a devastating effect on my childhood and the childhood of my siblings. And it also had a devastating effect on my parents' marriage. They managed to come through it, which I give them a lot of credit for. And my father did eventually stop gambling and start attending meetings, and things got better. But I always felt like there was something off about my dad, why he was so sort of emotionally stunted, and that there was this weird relationship between him and his parents and him and his sibling, and the way he treated people, because he would be this very loud and kind of the life of the party type. When we had people over, we were always hosting parties. When I was a kid, we were always like that house where we would host all of the holidays and family would come to visit us. And he was always the life of the party. He was always an excellent host. My mother was always an excellent hostess, and he would always make people laugh. People would always say, oh, he was hilarious. And, he would dress up as Santa Claus when we were kids, and he would always hand out candy. And I realize now, looking back, that my dad did have a lot of narcissistic qualities, because he was this engaging person, this charming, kind of affable guy to everyone around him, but he could be very cruel to us at home. And no one really knew what we were going through. And when you talk about something like a gambling addiction, I mean, that's something that's even harder to hide than maybe some of the other addictions. Because if someone is an alcoholic, they might be spending a lot of their times in bars, or they might appear, intoxicated if someone was to come to the house. But with gambling, it's really more on, the down low. It's very hidden. And so, unless you're putting your finances out there for everyone to see, no one's really going to understand.
Yeah.
And it was just a constant up and down.
Yeah. With the research that you've done, Marie, you would know now, especially reflecting back on your childhood, that the narcissistic parent, as seem to have happened with you, portrays this image. They must portray this image to the rest of the world, that they are this amazing parent. It's all about image and reputation, hence, the parties, everyone coming around all the time and being, the best host. It's about what everyone thinks of them, and the abuse takes place behind closed doors. And you as a child would have been conditioned to support that image to the rest of the world, which must have been so confusing for you when you're being abused behind those closed front doors.
And I realized, I can realize now, looking back, that when I married my first husband, even though I never intended for it to happen, I think I was always even looking for quite the opposite in the men that I had dated before I met my first husband. I ended up marrying someone exactly like my father.
Wow. When did you have that realization, Marie? Because that's got to be a very confusing, scary moment for you when you realize that this person that you have married is exactly like or a mirror image of the person, the abusive person who raised you.
I think at first when I met my husband, I definitely saw the similarities in, personality. I saw that same sort of like charming, engaging, funny, trying to make everyone his friend, makes friends easily when they could walk into a room and they're talking to everyone within 5 minutes. They can engage with a complete stranger and have, a heartfelt conversation. And I think I didn't want to admit it to myself. I think I saw it on some level, but I felt like, no, this person is different from my father, because this person is is warm. This person is tender at times, and I didn't get those things growing up very often. So even though there are similarities, I don't want to simplify it and say this person's my father, or this person is exactly like my father.
Yeah.
But I think I realized almost, the relationship, progressed very quickly when I met my husband. We, had met each other as kids, and he was the first boy I ever kissed. And I think that image stuck in my mind of like, that makes him special somehow, that I knew him from when I was a child. And somehow there's that trust level there that, he comes from the same, area that I do. And we have similar cultural backgrounds, and we get each other. And then we reconnected later on in life, in our late 20s. And the relationship progressed so quickly. It was almost, I didn't realize how quickly I was being sucked in, but it was, we had this long distance relationship. We were living in different states. We started talking on the phone, and almost immediately I was starting to be love bombed. But I did not realize it. I really did not. I didn't even know that term at the time. So I think he was, it was almost like he would ask me all these questions, and I thought that he was looking, to find out more about me, that he was really trying to figure out who I was as a human being to really connect with me. But what he was doing was arming himself with data.
He was doing what all narcissists do in the beginning, Marie. He was gathering data. He was finding out all your vulnerabilities, your weaknesses, your likes, your dislikes. He wanted to mirror you to make himself appear to be the person of your dreams. And love bombing is about cementing you in very, very quickly, making this relationship a whirlwind. You don't have time to think.
And the interesting thing is that since he was not the first narcissistic and coercively controlling and abusive person that I had ever been with, and his abuse really didn't start until a little bit later in sort of a slow burn type of way, the way you described it, I didn't recognize it, because the men that I had been with before that, I think, were way more direct with their coercion, with their abuse. Right. One of those men sexually assaulted me when I was in my early 20s. And I didn't even realize that that's what it was at the time, because it's a very, it's a complicated story, and I don't have to go into the whole, all of the details, but my assumption, being that it was that long ago at that age, was that if the sexual act started off consensual and ended on a non-consensual level, that I couldn't say that it was sexual assault.
Right. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, Marie, and that you didn't feel at the time that you could get any type of justice, or obviously that you would believe that this was assault. And it's scary that it's only just starting to change now, in that it's assault whether you say no right at the beginning, or you say no after you've consented to engage in the act for most of the act. If you say no at any given time and they continue, then that's assault, that's rape. And I'm so sorry that you didn't get the justice at the time that you deserved. And yes, it's assault no matter when you say no. Everyone out there, you have the right to say no whenever you want.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And I was actually piggybacking off of one of those relationships. The relationship that I was coming out of when I met my husband was, not only had there been sexual assault in that relationship that was much more egregious than what had happened the first time, but the relationship was also, it was physically abusive. It was emotionally abusive. It was controlling. But it's so interesting because when I look back at all these different men, I can easily say that they all had narcissistic qualities, that they all used coercion, but they all used it in different little nuanced ways.
Different ways. So that's so normal, Marie, for victims of child abuse, where you've grown up with a narcissistic parent, in that you find yourself in relationship after relationship that is so similar in the way you view love, because your parents, our parents teach us what love is. So if their version of love is about control, if you're taught that love and control are the same thing, or that love and abuse go hand in hand, or the people who love you don't allow you to have any boundaries or needs, and that's, woven into your psyche as your brain's forming, as you're growing up, then it makes sense that you're going to find these people, because that is what you were taught that love is. And this is why you find yourself in all these relationships that are so similar. But it's not that you or anyone else out there who finds themselves in the same kind of pattern of partners. It's not that you seek them out, Marie. It's that on a subconscious level, you veer away from healthy relationships because they're unfamiliar, and these toxic relationships are familiar to you.
Definitely. I think the interesting thing is also that culturally, I think where I came from, I think where I was born and where I grew up, and I think the type of family that I had, I think it was culturally ingrained in us that, women are expected to serve. I would never call my mother a weak woman. I think actually with the way that she held on and the way that she kept our family together, despite, financial problems and my father's addiction and the other things, I think she's quite strong. But I do think that, my parents were born in a time where, neither of the families had a ton of money. Neither of my parents, could afford to attend college. They started working right out of high school. And I think that there was this, sort of cultural, traditional aspect that women are there to serve men in these types of relationships. And I grew up with that, thinking that, I had to somehow, make a man like me, that I had to make myself different, that I had to make myself better, and that I never ever focused on if the person that I was with was fulfilling any of my needs, only that I was fulfilling theirs.
Right. So, yes, those cultural values that are instilled in you are certainly going to make a domestic violence situation, which is based on power and control, it's not going to help, and it's only going to make that even more normal for you, in that there are such differences in the roles that are expected, from between a man and a woman in a marriage, in an intimate relationship. You're going to be, I guess you could say, the perfect target for a narcissist who wants to take, and you, not only as an empath, want to give, but you've also been conditioned that giving and never receiving is your duty.
And, I see it play out over and over again, looking back at my relationships and in, my marriage, despite all of the issues that started to come up, all the red flags that I started to see, from, this narcissistic person, from my, abuser, the lies and things not really making sense and, lashing out at me, and things of that sort. When, we did eventually get married, the very first thing that he wanted from me was a child. We had not been married, I think maybe a month, and he already wanted to start having children. And I thought, back then, wow, this person really loves me. This person really wants to start a family with me and sees these qualities. And our relationship is going so well that, he is ready to be a provider, and we're ready to start this family. And then when we ran into fertility issues, and at first I wasn't getting pregnant, and then I was getting pregnant and having recurrent miscarriages, I started to realize that every single time I didn't give him what he wanted, which was a child, so that he could maintain that control over me, he started to move away more and more, a little bit each time.
Right. So he used such a devastating experience for you, losing your babies. He used that to punish you because you weren't meeting his demands. You weren't giving him what he needed, and no thought for what you were experiencing in having to go through that. It must have been incredibly traumatic for you.
It was. And, not only is something like that, pregnancy loss itself and child loss is so incredibly traumatic to go through, and the grief is, indescribable.
Yes.
But I kept feeling like a failure. I kept feeling like not only is my body failing me in something that I really want in this family that I always pictured having, but I feel like I'm failing him. I feel like I am alone, sort of drowning in this pool. And no matter what I did, I think, I underwent so much testing, to figure out, the infertility and then the recurrent losses. I took medication to try to make me more fertile, which landed me in the emergency room, with a ruptured ovarian cyst. And I had all of these painful, surgeries after the miscarriages and all of these, invasive tests. And it was awful to go through. And I felt like I was alone, even if he was there in the room with me, because he just seemed like he was moving further and further away.
Yeah.
And just, once I did finally become pregnant, and it seemed like, the pregnancy was progressing well. When I ended up having this testing done, this genetic testing done at about maybe 9 or 10 weeks. And I found out at that same time that not only was everything going well, but that I was having a girl. And so I was very excited. The baby's healthy. And when I went and told him that I was having a girl, he seemed genuinely disappointed. And the look on his face, I'll never forget it, because I remember thinking to myself, oh, he's going to be so elated to have a daughter. He is just so ready to like be loving and spoil her and just, just be this engaging father. And when I said we're having a daughter, he seemed just utterly disappointed. And later on, I realized why. And when we had separated, what he said to me, word for word, was, I'm going to go be with someone else and I am going to get the son that I deserve. So not only had I gone through all of those losses, but I had essentially just torn myself apart to start this family. And even after I had done all this work and, we had this beautiful, healthy baby girl, all he could think to say to me was, you're still not good enough because you haven't provided me with a male heir.
So,
which is insane if you think
it's insane. But if you look at it through the lenses of the narcissist, who is completely devoid of empathy and needs to continually pummel you down so you try harder and you get up and try again, that's where their narcissistic supply comes from. If you look at it through their lenses, it actually makes sense. If he was to say, good job, Marie, thank you so much, you're amazing, you might stop trying to please him. And his joy, his sadistic joy, came from you failing and getting up and trying again and again. And it's despicable, but whether it's you providing them with a baby and going through all of that trauma and pain to try and please them, or it's you not washing the dishes properly. They're both in the same category for a narcissist. They will shift the goalposts. They will always shift the goalposts so that you fail and you get back up and you try again. And of course, so that you always feel worthless. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because if, the cycle of it is, if I think back to like one individual thing with each relationship, I could say, well, this person didn't do this and this person didn't do that. And, but it's so interesting, how I kind of hopped from relationship to relationship, almost like not in a healthy way, like I think maybe a healthier way. And it's hard for me to even say it because I haven't experienced it a whole lot in my life, but I would think that a healthy way to date or to enter and exit relationships is to sit down and say with the person, this is not working out and we need to separate. And then you take some time and you recover and, realize who you, and then love yourself and heal and then move on. I never did that. I hopped from danger to fleeing, to back to someone who I thought was rescuing me, to danger, to fleeing that person. And I would just hop to someone new who I thought was going to save me. And I realized in the end that I had to save myself.
Yes. Yep. You're the only one who can heal that wound or those wounds. The abuse was not your fault. And it was not your fault that you were familiar with these toxic relationships and that there's a reason that you go from one to the next. The abuse is never the victim's fault. I don't care what you do. All victims engage in what we call reactive abuse that they're set up to do. The abuse is not your fault, but the healing is going to be on you. So, Marie, tell me a little bit about the discard, because that's essentially what happened for you. You found a pattern of narcissistic behaviors or you've realized that you were in a relationship with more than one narcissist and that these relationships to you are familiar. But tell me about your marriage and the discard and what happened after he said he was going to move on to someone else who could give him a boy. What was that like for you? And tell us about the immediate aftermath.
Well, it's interesting. We separated when my daughter was very young. He was such a mess at that time. He was, not only, was he just emotionally just completely inept and didn't have what it takes to be a supportive father or a supportive husband, but he was also abusing medication, which was even scarier when we were married, because I never felt quite safe for him to be alone with the child. And it put me on such edge that I was so sleep deprived and torn apart by the time that we had actually separated. Although when he first left, I think I was relieved. I thought, okay, look, we'll get through this, my daughter and I, and this is a good thing that he is gone. That means that there will be no more fear, that I won't be cursed at while I'm holding my daughter, that I won't be called names or insulted while I'm breastfeeding my daughter in the night.
You won't be walking on eggshells anymore.
Right.
Free and home.
Yes. But the interesting thing is that his threat, he followed through on it. He did get someone else pregnant before we had divorced, while we were still separated. And he threw it in my face. It was a barrage of text messages that I could only describe as vitriol word salad, just constant of, you're a leech, you're a loser, you're a terrible mother. I'm going to marry this new girl and she's pregnant and it's a boy. And, she's going to give me everything that you never could. And it was awful. The post-separation abuse was, I think, worse than the abuse during the marriage.
Yeah. He needed to destroy you, as all narcissists do. Every victim, every one of my beautiful clients asks that question: why don't they just sail off into the sunset? With the new target they seem to be so happy with. Why do they need to inflict more pain on me? And it's because they have that connection with you, and they can. You are an amazing source of narcissistic supply, and they thrive off your pain, and they believe you deserve it. So here you would have been still healing, still, recovering from the discard, even though, things are starting to feel a little better. Then you have that thrown in your face. See, you are a failure, Marie. This woman, she's better than you. She can actually, make me happy. And it's designed, that post-separation abuse is designed to get you while you are down, to inflict maximum pain so you never forget about them, and hopefully so that you will react to their abuse, and that will give them some beautiful situations where they can triangulate you with this new soulmate. Did anything like that happen for you?
Yes, absolutely. And with more than one person, you know, there was triangulation between myself and the mother of that child. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is that I find that we don't really communicate that much anymore, but I found that in the beginning, their relationship, shortly after he had gotten her pregnant, fell apart very quickly in the early stages of her pregnancy. So he had then impregnated her and then discarded her as well. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is insane, but not really surprising at the same time.
No, because it's not about. It was never about you having a boy or right. having a child to love and to nurture. It was about power and control mm-hmm. and coercion and getting a woman pregnant. What a better way to have at least 18 years of good narcissistic supply where you use the child they love to destroy them with family court, etc. And as your abuser did with you, to triangulate with the next target.
He then, went on to have a third child with a different woman.
Oh my goodness.
And with that woman, it was even more triangulation because, I actually reached out and tried to warn her. And I thought this could go one of two ways. When I reached out, I said she could be thankful, she could be grateful and say, thank you. Because my message to her was, I wish I had known these things when I met him. I wish I had known these things before I married him, and even more so before I had a child, because now I am tied to him forever and I'm trying to save you from that. Yeah. But sadly, what happened was the complete opposite.
Yes.
He had triangulated the us so well that she, cursed at me. She told me that I was a liar. She accused me of things I had never done. Which is one of his favorite words to throw out. I think it's a favorite word of many narcissistic people is loyalty. They equate, loyalty with control. Their being loyal is something entirely different. And I understand that now. Yeah. I'm actually remarried again to a very healthy man who's supportive and wonderful. And we have that loyalty, but it's not about control.
Yes.
In any way. It's not about one person getting their way. It's about working together. Yeah. But it's about working, towards the same goal.
Yes.
So to narcissists,
sorry, go on, Marie.
No, I was just going to say, it's with narcissists, it's always that tie-in of loyalty of you're not loyal. I need someone who is 100% loyal, AKA someone who lets me do whatever I want.
Yes. And someone who will develop a very high threshold for abuse and let me abuse them. That's loyalty to a narcissist. You're absolutely right. So it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that, well, it's not interesting. It's actually textbook, Marie, the fact that you approached the new target and she wanted nothing to do with you. And the reason that obviously you want to help them, you don't want to see another person go through the pain and the torture that you did. But they've been told that you're the crazy, jealous ex, and they've been told that you'll probably approach them. So when you do, you actually push them further unbeknownst to you, of course, you push them further into the narcissist's arms because you prove the narcissist right. The narcissist expects you to do that, and they cover all bases. So clearly she had or has her own journey ahead of her, and she's not going to believe the crazy jealous ex as you've been portrayed to be by your abuser to her.
It's true. That's absolutely true. And I've realized that the triangulation doesn't only happen with partners. The triangulation happens, in the family court. And that is the most painful thing. The end of the relationship absolutely was painful for many reasons, and not so much just because he left. I think him leaving was a relief and was a good thing. And I was grateful. But the rest of the fallout of divorce is just generally just very difficult. And it's so much harder to do when you're single parenting, because as much as he, would say these threatening text messages of, I want a relationship with my daughter and I'm going to have this relationship with her. He was almost non-existent after he left. He was out of touch. He was on to the next woman. And then the next woman after that. I mean, I was basically single parenting this young infant, taking on all of it.
Yes. But your child is the narcissist's property. It doesn't matter that they have nothing to do with the child. They're their property. And they also know that is the most important thing in the world to you. And that you will fight tooth and nail to protect your child. Hence, they will get you to engage. You're not going to go no contact. You're not going to go away and heal. You're going to fight to protect your child. They know this, and that is enjoyable for them. They don't want to finish it. They want to see you in court. They want you to come out of no contact and meet them in court to intimidate you further, to triangulate you with the new target, and to feed off your pain. They want to be inside your head. So, Marie, how did he prevent you, now that you look back and you have hindsight, how did he prevent you from escaping?
My daughter is really the main reason that I can never fully escape him. Unlike the previous abusers, I'm grateful for the fact that I will most likely never ever see those men ever again in my life, and I'll never have to have a conversation with them. But this man that I chose to marry, that I chose to have a child with, my daughter has been used as a pawn by him, by his attorneys, by the family court to keep me abused,
Can you
keep me entangled.
Yeah, textbook. Can you give us a little context around how that panned out, right? Like what happened in the family court, and what kind of contact your daughter has now with your abuser and her narcissistic father?
Well, so I mentioned that we had separated. We went into that very first temporary custody hearing when my daughter was 12 months old. And she was still breastfeeding. and she was breastfeeding on demand. And even though she was eating, food, she was eating solid food, she had never used a bottle in her life. So her main source of nutrients was still coming from me. And I walked into that court and I thought that I had this lawyer who was going to fight tooth and nail. And the judge treated me like I was dirt, a piece of gum on the bottom of his shoe. He was immediately, and the interesting thing is that I was at court on time. My ex-husband was at court, I want to say about 2 hours late for the hearing.
Oh my goodness.
And despite him walking in late, bloodshot eyes, no idea what he was doing, we had all of this evidence. We had testimony. We had, my own testimony from my family. I had, drug tests of his that had turned positive because he had been using a specific substance. And all of it was ignored by the judge. The judge, everything that we presented, every piece of evidence was knocked down. And the judge's comments were, well, he seems to make a lot of money, so he seems pretty responsible.
Oh my goodness. So please don't tell me they gave 50-50 care to him.
Not at that time. At that time, they gave him standard. So here, that means like every other weekend and certain holidays.
Okay.
So still, she was with me the majority of the time. And even after he was given that, he still failed to visit her a lot. And I recorded it all. I had everything notated down in a journal. I had video. I had audio. I had all these recordings. I had text messages. And then when things started to really escalate to a point where, it was a few years later, I had remarried. I had, a son with my current husband, and we were essentially raising this little family. And my husband had, my current husband had always been my daughter's father. He was the one who raised her. He taught her how to tie her shoes. He taught her how to read. He taught her, he potty trained her, all those things that a dad should do. He did those things with her, not her birth father. And when it came time, and there had been all of this post, separation abuse and, financial abuse because he had, withheld so much child support and then also refused to pay his portion of medical expenses and all of these other things. And I finally said, that's it. We're going to go back to court. The judge again, and it was a completely different judge, and it was a woman, which struck me even more dumbfounded because this particular judge put herself on the ballot as, that she's out to stand up for the little guy, that she is a domestic abuse survivor. So I thought, well, if anyone's going to get it, it is this judge. I was absolutely wrong. This one treated me worse than the first. She was disgusted with me. She put all of the blame of the relationship on me. She claimed that I should have done better, that I should have tried harder. She, scolded me like I was a child. I was absolutely destroyed after that trial. And the interesting thing was at the actual trial, she awarded him with sort of like an extended standard, which gives him like extra long weekends. So it's kind of, but then we left court. And the other terrible thing that she did to me was that she told me that I had wasted her time, even though there was all of this evidence about, drug abuse, about his ex-partner being, a convicted felon and her having drug abuse, about the male child being taken away from both of them and taken away by CPS. We had so much.
She didn't want to hear you. Why?
No.
Why do you think, Marie?
Still to this day, I don't understand. I don't. And the only answer that I could get was that she's a wild card. She is an absolute wild card when it comes to her cases. And she has actually done this to other parents. There was another case where it was sort of flipped. The mother was the unhealthy parent and the father was the healthy parent who had always taken care of the child, who I believe was a diabetic child. And the mother, had failed to give her medication and all of these things. So they had gone down and they kept like removing more of the mother's visitation and more of it and more of it. And they went in front of this judge, and this judge said, after all of these things that this father had been through, well, mama, I guess it's your lucky day. I'm going to give you one more chance. And she gave that mother 50-50 custody of that child.
Oh my goodness.
It's almost like she's just flipping a coin, just like, yeah. And the worst thing that she could have done to me is that she told me that I had wasted the court's time, and she ordered me to pay all of my ex-husband's legal fees.
Oh my goodness. Talk about a family court fail. Why did you have to pay, in her mind? What was her reasoning for you having to pay his court costs? What was it that you were trying to achieve that was unreasonable, given that this person was a gambling addict, a drug addict, and never wanted his child? Why did she seem to want to punish you?
He, I think, was looking at me to be a certain type of victim. I think many times, in these instances of, and I'm not even going to say that there was reactive abuse, but I want to say that, the way it's portrayed is that if you're not meek, if you're not groveling on the ground, if you are strong and you stand up for yourself, and at times, don't get me wrong, I was weak and groveling. I was crying nights and nights because of this man and the things that he was calling me, and the financial abuse and the strain and all of it. But there were times where I stood up for myself because I knew that I was right. And so if he would say something to me via text message, I would fire back, and I would say, you're wrong, or you're this, or leave me alone, or stop bothering me.
So you weren't the typical victim, as victims are supposed to all be put in one box, aren't they? And victims are supposed to all look the same, with, be very timid and meek, and perhaps be covered, in bruises. And that's what makes it so hard to get justice with narcissistic abuse and coercive control, is that it is so covert most of the time. And clearly this judge was not familiar with coercive control, and they did not look at what was going on in the lead up, and how you were and they were being manipulated into thinking that you were in fact the abuser, and your abuser, the actual abuser, the victim. So it sounds like what you were experiencing in court, Marie, was Darvo. The narcissist was flipping those roles: deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. It happens in family court all the time. And a naive, ignorant judge who's unfamiliar with personality disorders is going to fall for it, and to the detriment to you and so many other victims in family court. So, Marie, tell me how these experiences with these terribly abusive experiences with these partners, your husband, and of course, narcissistic parents or parent. Tell me how they've shaped your life now that you're an adult. Or how have they, sorry, let me rephrase that. Marie, how have they shaped your view of not just your life, but women's lives, women's rights in general, given your experiences, especially in family court?
I think the apparent thing, and, I realize that we're all kind of running at different speeds. Australia, may be getting different sort of, gainings on coercive control depending on where you live. And the same with, I think the two countries that I follow the most outside of the US are Australia and the UK. And I know the UK is sort of gaining on certain things. I think sadly, the US, it feels as though we are moving backwards. And I think maybe plenty of other women in other countries could say the same. I feel like even in the last maybe 7 or 8 years since my daughter, was born, I feel like we are taking these steps backwards. If you look at all the laws that have been passed, the, reversal of Roe v. Wade, the reproductive rights that are being snatched away from women, it is terrifying. It's even more terrifying because I have a daughter, and I worry immensely about what her options are going to be one day if maybe she is sexually assaulted and needs to have a pregnancy terminated, or if, she is trying to get pregnant and she finds herself, miscarrying that child. It is terrifying because back when I was having my miscarriages, I don't want to use the word fortunate, but I was fortunate enough where it was in a time where I was able to get care.
Right. Yeah.
And I cannot say that that is happening now. And it's the same thing with other rights. I mean, we're dialing back on diversity, equity, and inclusion laws. We're dialing back on LGBTQ rights. It's really insane. And it's so terrifying because I feel like watching women's rights and watching the rights of, minorities get stronger during my childhood and during my 20s, and then watching them diminish as I'm heading towards midlife is so sad. It's so sad, and it makes me so enraged because I look to the women around me and I look to the future women, these young ladies, these young girls that we are raising. And I'm terrified and I'm disgusted.
Yeah. So it sounds like your views have really changed since you've become older now that you're looking back. So why do you think it's changed? Maurice, what are your current views in midlife around those changes and your views on why you think that in your country in particular, that it has kind of taken steps backwards for women and minority groups in particular?
I think, to put it simply, and this is a very simplistic answer, would be the patriarchy. We are in a patriarchal country. We are ruled by men of a certain color, for the most part, men of a certain stature, men of a certain wealth group. And if you don't fall into that, if you don't appear as that, you are on the battling end. And it's interesting because I never thought of myself as someone who was not privileged. I mean, I'm a white female, and I grew up, in an average, middle income neighborhood. I always thought, I don't enjoy labeling myself this way, but I have a privilege. mainly because I am not a minority. I'm heterosexual. That also sort of puts me in a bit more of the majority. And I think it's interesting because I feel so much more like everything is being twisted, and it's made me realize that I don't identify, that I can't identify and associate with many of the people that I tolerated for many years. I think for many years I said to myself, well, this person might have different political views than me or different religious views than me, but deep down we're all people. And I've almost become a little bit more cutthroat on that since I've gotten older, because I've said, look, we are headed for something very dangerous if this continues. We are headed in a very, very awkward, backward, sideways society. And if we don't start to make some changes, if we don't start to make some real headway, and, we only have, I think, maybe a handful of states of United States that have coercive control, maybe officially codified. It might be 5 or 6.
Yeah.
If we don't start to recognize coercion, recognize coercive control, and not just recognize it by putting it in code or putting it in our laws, but actually training people on it.
Yes.
We need to start training governmental people, judges, attorneys, family court individuals, all of these people, because they don't understand it.
They don't. And I often say this, Marie, that don't get me wrong, the legislation that's come in just in the last couple of days, actually, coercive control is now a criminal offence. The laws were passed, I think, 2 days ago in New South Wales, and a few months ago here in Queensland, where I live. And this is a huge step forward in having this type of abuse recognised as abuse. You're not going crazy. This is abuse, and it is a criminal offence. But it's all well and good to have this legislation, but we've got to make sure that the people who enforce the legislation understand it and can also help victims often to understand that what they're experiencing is abuse. For instance, first responders, where a victim who's been conditioned to minimize and normalize their abuse, and they think that love and control are the same thing, that someone who loves you abuses you. They've grown up with that. Perhaps we're going to need to even teach the victims that this is abuse and it's not okay, and they don't have to live like that. We need the family courts, the judiciary system, first responders, everyone clearly working in the mental health profession to have a really, really good understanding, because it's not just as simple as someone controlling all your social media, is it? Or stopping you from having access to money. It's so much more insidious than that, where the victim ends up isolating themselves, taking themselves off social media, stopping going to the gym, stopping all their passions through fear of punishment. And they don't recognise that's abuse, and you can't tell the abuser that's abuse either, because they'll throw it back in your face because you made the decision to drop those things and isolate yourself, even though the abuser coerced those isolating decisions as sure as they pushed the buttons. And this is what we need. The people who are going to enforce it and provide consequences to the abuser, this is what we need them to understand, don't we?
Absolutely. It's systemic. It's coming from every single level. And I was that person. After this, most recent, stint in family court where, eventually, my ex was given 50-50 custody and I was ordered, to pay all of his legal bills. I was destroyed on a level that I don't think I have ever been in my entire life. After been, everything that I had been through leading up to that point, and after everything I had done to fight for my daughter's safety and to surround myself with healthy people so that my daughter could see a healthy relationship, could be around a healthy father figure, and see what it's like when her mother is loved, truly loved and respected and cherished. To have that all thrown in my face was something that I was not quite prepared for. And it probably took me, I'd say, at least a year to recover emotionally. I'm still recovering emotionally, but I think the worst of it probably took a year, where I completely cut myself off from social media. I cut myself off from certain friends. I limited conversation, with everyone because I was ashamed. I was ashamed, and I was made to feel ashamed by the people who were supposed to protect me the most.
Protect you. And that's what it boils down to, doesn't it? Is that a victim of abuse, domestic violence, this is abused twice. They're abused by their abuser, and then you can go and do all the right things. You can do everything that you're told to, get support, go to therapy. But if you're going to be abused twice in the family court or any court, then what's the point that the victim's going to think in even trying to heal and get justice, when history suggests that the family court in particular do not understand these types of abuses. They do not understand that the true victim is not just, they're not all going to fit into one box, and the abuser is not always this person with horns, that you can pick immediately, and they're going to be, very charismatic and pretend to be the victim. And so, the true victim gets abused twice when the court does not protect them. Not only does it not protect the true victim, but it rewards the abuser for abusing the victim. And that's why we, as you said, Marie, we need so much more education for the people who are going to enforce the laws and provide justice for the victims and consequences for the abusers. So, Marie, just in, summarizing or just in ending this podcast, what advice do you have for victims who are going through what you went through, where you felt like you couldn't escape? What advice do you have to them now? Or if they're not really recognizing that what they're experiencing as abuse, what do you say to them?
I would say, if you are experiencing any kind of abuse, or if even you have the inkling that you are not being treated equally, fairly, and with respect, and that you feel like things are not reciprocal in your relationship, and it's not always a romantic relationship. I mean, parent-child, siblings, at work, anything like that. If you have any inkling that something is happening, I would say reach out. I have many sources of support. I have a wonderful therapist who has been incredibly helpful that I've seen for the past year. So that is a great way to do it, is to talk to someone. I would say another thing is, podcasts like yours. There are so many well-educated people all over the world with podcasts and that provide speaking opportunities in person, conferences, things that you can attend, that they have websites where you can look at these characteristics of these abusive narcissistic people and recognize that that's what you're going through. Don't be afraid to reach out and gain information from as many sources as you can. And don't ever feel like it is your fault. It is so hard, especially when you're being triangulated, when you're being persecuted by not only the abuser, but by the systems that are supposed to be there to be put in place to protect you, and you're not. It is so hard to not blame yourself, but you have to recognize that you are not to blame. You are the victim. You are capable of great things, and you're capable of getting away. And I would never say to someone, well, if you're being abused, just leave, because I think that's something that we make so simplistic. Yes. We say to abused people all the time, well, if he hits you, just leave. Well, if she is abusing you, just leave, just pack up your things and go. It is not that easy.
Like the victim doesn't think about that, 100 times a day. The victim knows what to do, where to go, and it's not easy. And
and if you're running with children, it's even harder.
Because it makes you dependent on them, and you're scared that you'll leave with nothing, you won't be able to support them, and then you've got a family court system who's not going to support you either. And of course, you fear the post-separation abuse. There are so many reasons that victims don't leave, and of course, because of that very powerful trauma bond to their abuser.
I think once I started reaching out, once I started realizing that this is what was happening to me, and had happened to me repeatedly during my life, I have connected with so many wonderful people throughout the world, via, social media, the little bit that I am still on, via podcasts, via websites, via support groups. And all of that has helped me. And finally being in a healthy relationship has helped me. But even that, when I first met my husband, it was challenging because I had to really dive into all that trauma and almost teach myself what a healthy relationship meant, what real love means.
Yeah. And you deserve that, Marie, and you're so worthy of it. And clearly your abuser lied to you, as the narcissist always lies to the victim about your worth, but they make you dependent on them for what your value is. And now you're learning what your true value is. So, Marie, look, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story with me and other victims and survivors out there who will be listening today. You are inspirational, and you've also shown victims and survivors of this abuse, domestic violence, narcissistic abuse, and coercive control are domestic abuse, domestic violence. You have shown them that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is light after narcissistic abuse, and you are so worthy of more, a whole lot more than what the narcissist made you believe. So, Marie, I just wanted to say thank you for joining me. And yes, I know that everyone listening tonight, will feel less alone in hearing your story. So thank you.
Nova, I really appreciate you letting me, having me as a guest and letting me share.
My absolute pleasure. Okay, Marie, take care. And once again, thank you. And that brings us to the end of yet another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Thank you for listening right through till the end. I really hope that you found Marie's story validating, in that you know that you're not alone and that someone else is out there going through something just like you've been going through, and you don't feel quite so isolated. Please leave a review, guys. I would love to read your reviews. And also don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode. And of course, so you're first off the mark when they drop. And don't forget to grab your copy of my book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse, available in all good bookstores worldwide. And next week's episode, you don't want to miss this one. We're going to be talking about how to, in inverted commas, co-parent with a narcissist. Okay. On that note, guys, it's bye from me for now. I will see you all then. Until then, remember, you are worthy of so much love, and you are certainly worthy of a whole lot more than a lifetime of fake love and flying monkeys.